I'd like to start with just a brief introduction. My name is Father Nick Parker. I'm currently the pastor of Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish in Hayes, but Father Brian is gone this weekend. He is going to be gone for the next few weekends, I believe. He's preparing to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So he asked me to come and celebrate Mass with you today, which I'm very happy to do. But also would encourage you to please keep Father Brian, as well as all those who are going on pilgrimage, in your prayers, that they might have a safe trip, safe travels, and also a very good experience while they are in the Holy Land. Moving into our gospel today, our gospel begins with Jesus telling his disciples about his passion and death. Now, when he does this, we have to make sure that we don't miss the shock factor that is going on here. Jesus is a very young leader, a very vibrant leader, and he has these disciples that are incredibly dedicated to him. And so when he is with them, when he says that he is going to die, but not only that he's going to die, but he's going to die soon, not only is it going to be soon, but it is going to be a death of great suffering and even a death of great humiliation. His disciples, hearing this, would have been absolutely scandalized by what they are hearing. And that is kind of what's happening. We see this with how Peter responds. Peter, he takes Jesus aside and he says, "God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you." But then we get Jesus's very powerful but very strange line, "Get behind me, Satan, you are an obstacle to me." Now, that's kind of a harsh thing to say to one of your closest friends. I'm not for sure how many of us would speak that way to our closest friends. But with that, it's easy to miss what Jesus is actually saying here. There's a couple nuances that are going on. So it's good for us then to unpack this a little bit. First of all, it looks as though he's doing a little name calling here when he calls Peter Satan. Now, Satan is a word that oftentimes is applied to the devil, but in reality, the word Satan is a Latin word, and it literally means enemy or adversary. And so what Jesus is saying to Peter here is he's actually not calling him the devil, but rather he's telling him that he is not acting as a friend. By trying to stop Jesus in his mission, he is acting as an adversary or an enemy to the mission. That's a really good way, I think, of reading this. And once we read it in that light, then the other part of Jesus' line is going to make a little bit more sense as well. Because notice how he says, "Get behind me." Now, when you are battling with the devil, most people would not say, "This is difficult, devil. Could you just go behind me where I can't see you?" That's not what you would say. You wouldn't say, "Get behind me." You wouldn't say, "Just stand beside me." You wouldn't say, "Why don't you just stay in the corner for a while?" You would say, "Get away from me, and get away from me completely." But Jesus says, "Get behind me." And why does he say that? Well, think of it this way for a moment. Think about a group that is walking somewhere. And this can be any kind of a group. It can be a group of friends. It could be a tour group. It could be a group of maybe soldiers that are marching somewhere. Any sort of group that you like. When you see this group, who is the person who is walking in the front? Well, just in general, it's always going to be the leader. The leader walks in front, while the rest follow behind. What is happening in our gospel today? Well, after Jesus talks about his passion and death, Peter gets in front of Jesus. Peter is now trying to take the lead. In essence, he's saying to Jesus, "Jesus, this isn't a good plan. I have another plan. You follow me." But that's not how things are supposed to be. So Jesus tells Peter, "I need you to get behind me. I need you to be my disciple and follow me." don't be my adversary or my enemy or this Satan, but I need you to follow in my ways. That's really what Jesus is doing here. And so it's not so much of a harsh rebuke that he's giving to Peter, but it really is a correction and an invitation for Peter to get back in line and for that right relationship to be reestablished. That's ultimately the relationship we want to have as well. We want to be those who aren't taking the lead in life, but rather are the ones that are following the Lord in life. And it's great that Jesus doesn't just stop there. He actually gives us instruction as how to do this. He says, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Now, that's a great theme for us Christians, but what Jesus is actually asking us to do is, in that line, he's asking us to do something that has become, I want to say, a little bit of a dirty word in our modern world. He's asking his people to sacrifice. And people in our modern day don't like that term sacrifice, because the term sacrifice has this definition that goes along with it that basically says, this is going to hurt. Even as Christians today, we don't like the idea that this is going to hurt. We smile and we nod at these words of Jesus, but it's hard to actually follow them, because many think that following Christ is supposed to make things easier, that it's supposed to take away our sufferings if we follow the Lord. But you don't have to look very far in church history to find out that that's not the case. Jesus does not say he is going to take away the sufferings of this life, but he does very clearly ask us to sacrifice for him. And so what does this sacrifice look like? Well, there's going to be 3 steps. The first step that Jesus gives us, deny yourself. Basically what this means is that there are a lot of legitimate good things in the world today. Things like nice meals or fine homes or fancy cars or luxuries that provide for different pleasure or security, even having extra wealth. None of these things are wrong in and of themselves. They're really actually fine. But by denying yourself, what you do is you realize these legitimate goods and you give them up in one way or another. Now, another way to think about this is we need to learn to inconvenience ourselves. It's always convenient to live according to what our wants are, but to inconvenience ourselves deliberately and intentionally, that's a great way of actually denying yourself. You know, we've always been teaching this notion of sacrifice, not always, but for several years we've been teaching this notion of sacrifice in a little bit of a different way. Because we don't like to talk about sacrifice all the time, we will sometimes rework it in a prettier package that people are more readily able to accept. And so for several years we've been distributing it under the guise of what we call stewardship. Stewardship is something that we've been teaching in our diocese for years, but it really is this notion of denying yourself by giving of your time, talents, and treasures, inconveniencing yourself in order to give these things properly. Just take one example with that. Take the notion of time. Time is an incredibly valuable thing, especially with how hectic and busy our world is. With that, we need to learn that it's okay to inconvenience ourselves with our time. There's a million things that we could always be doing, but sometimes we need to deliberately take time aside so that we can give it to our spouses, to our families, to friends or others that just might need our time more than what it is valuable to us. Especially in the spiritual life. The spiritual life doesn't always just come easy. The spiritual life needs us to inconvenience ourselves. And so we take deliberate time out of our days, making sure that we actually carve out that section to devote it to God, to prayer, our devotions. We take these things and we give them up to the Lord. A legitimate good, all the things we could be spending our time with, we give up that legitimate good and deny ourselves for the sake of God. Now, the talents and treasure work the same way. I won't go into them, but you can just sort of follow that same pattern of how denying yourself works. So that's the first step of sacrifice, is to deny yourself. The second step of sacrifice, take up your cross. What taking up your cross means is that with this sacrifice, not only are there legitimate goods that we will have to give up, but there are also legitimate evils that we are going to need to accept. Now, when I say legitimate evil, what does that mean? Legitimate evil is not a moral evil. This isn't something that we do, like a sin or something like that. We're not going to go there. But basically, it acknowledges that sometimes bad things are going to happen. Sometimes we're going to be affected by the negative decisions of those around us. Sometimes we're going to experience the physical effects of this broken, finite world, whether that's the day-to-day challenges or sickness or disease or injury or disaster or whatever have you. During these times when just the simple evils of the world are a part of our lives, we accept that and we take them up as our cross, trying to bear them with patience, with humility, with gratitude for what we've been given, always persevering in our faith throughout the trials. I should also mention that when it comes to this, when it comes to taking up our cross, when we see others in their struggles, we're supposed to help them bear their crosses as well. But that's the second step. The first step, deny yourself, meaning give up the legitimate goods of our world. Second, take up our crosses. We are to bear the legitimate evils. And finally, Jesus tells us the last step of sacrifice is to follow him. By following Jesus, what this means is that, yes, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a challenge. But we know that Jesus goes before us. We know that whatever we have struggled with, he has struggled with first. And this means that in our difficulties, we have a companion on the journey. He is always with us throughout all of it. And this is why then sacrifice becomes so important. Because if we are willing to sacrifice for the Lord, what does that do? But it takes our struggles and our sufferings, and it helps transform them in a way that allows us to imitate Christ. If we don't offer ourselves in sacrifice, all the struggles in the world become pretty pointless. But if we are willing to sacrifice in the name of the Lord, then all of a sudden it has meaning, it has purpose. It allows us to become more like Christ. And if we can become more like Christ in this lifetime, then the struggles and the sacrifices become redemptive. It allows us to become in greater union with the Lord, which hopefully leads us to an eternal redemption with God in heaven.